Welcome to our live stream of Fellowship of Fans. We're going to be this week. We're going to be discussing the overall show and our thoughts on it, what we liked, what we disliked, and what we think we can do more of. And to get that started, I'm going to pass the mic over to everyone's favorite pedant, Chen. Disliked and what we think we can do more of. And to get that started, I'm going to pass the mic over to everyone's favorite pedant, Chen.
What's happening?
Someone has the stream playing on.
Someone's watching the stream.
I'm going to pass the mic over to everyone's favorite pedant.
What's happening?
Someone has the stream.
What is that? It's okay, fine.
Someone, if you have the YouTube stream open on your computer, for the love of God, mute it.
So I just got my.
All right, so
Okay.
Hen, now you want to get us started?
In terms of actually getting into it, yeah, you want me to do, I suppose, positives, pros and cons, so to speak.
Yes, you got to talk about your overall sentiment of the show, kind of.
Yeah, my overall sentiment of the show would be, I actually wrote it down. I wrote it that it's pleasant, going on, sometimes interesting, but ultimately a little bit tedious. Yeah, it always looks nice. It sounds nice. A lot of the scenes are very pleasing from a dramatic standpoint. Some of the character interactions are very pleasing. What it adds up to though is less than desirable simply through mostly kind of the pacing and how it's structured. And yeah, it's just the pacing, the structure of it, the way it's plotted, alongside some more conceptual issues, things that I'm not sure the show should have gone into.
Give me an example of some of those pacing issues.
Oh, super simple. This season is 9 hours long. 9 hours and 7 minutes, I think. Out of this, 5 minutes and a small change are spent purely on the setup, which is before Galadriel embarks on what would be the main endeavor of the season, which is the quest to relieve the Southlands of the menace of the orcs. That conflict is then worked out over the period of a single episode. Ends in an anticlimax, which is worked out over the penultimate episode, and then the final episode basically deals with a completely new story that has nothing to do with not nothing, but mostly is completely new to the season, hasn't been introduced before. And it's a peculiar way to structure this.
All right, Gregory, thoughts? I know Hen was speaking very broadly, so
yeah. First of all, I don't know if whoever's doing the technical side realizes we've got shines on the face of the whole stream right now.
I do. I'm gonna find a way to make that not be a thing. Sorry, Sean.
Why don't we? I was just gonna say, while he's on screen, why don't we go to him first, and then once we figure that out, yes. I can go after.
Good idea, Gregory.
Yeah, so for me, I've got a mix of emotions, right, about the show. So part of me is really excited. I'm pleased to see a different part of the history of Middle-earth displayed on the screen. So we get to see the second page the very first time. We get to see some different stories as well, and I like that. And I think, I like the visuals. I think Middle-earth looks the part. The sets look right. The costumes look good. The music, which I think is, it's slightly derivative in terms of, I think you could lift that music up and put it into any fantasy show, but it's still good music.
Okay.
I agree about the pacing. I think for me that the pacing is one of the biggest problems. In fact, I think you could watch episodes 1, 2, 6, and 8 and not watch the rest, and broadly speaking, not miss out on an awful lot. Actually, you're going to get pretty much the whole gist of the story just from those 4 episodes. So I think that for me is one of my biggest problems. There's also, there's a few challenges in terms of the changes to the lore from the story. Now, there's a big question mark here. Who is this show aimed at? Is it kind of like beginner level Tolkien fans, intermediate, or expert? Because it can't make its mind up. But sometimes it's like, is this kind of entry level? In which case, the lore doesn't really matter, right? And they're just doing an adaptation. This isn't a documentary of the history of the Second Age; it's an adaptation. But then at the same time, why bother with things like the repeated references to Elrond's father? Which is obviously in there to please Tolkien. Obviously there to please Tolkien fans, like really proper Tolkien fans. So I think there's a very slight identity crisis about what is this show trying to do? Who's it trying to appeal to? What is its audience here? Is it kind of general fantasy, even just general watchers, or is it for a Tolkien fan base? Because I think that basic challenge is part of the reason why it's from both sides. It feels like it's not quite hit the mark. There's been some friends of mine who are not into Tolkien who slightly felt like they struggled with some of those aspects that were quite pleasing to probably people like me, right? They felt like, where are these references coming from? Why is that there? And then obviously lots of Tolkien fans have struggled quite significantly, such as with the Galadriel storyline, particularly at the beginning, her going off to Valinor or not going off to Valinor, the storyline around the Mithril. That one, I think a lot of people have got quite some issues with. So, and again, there's an interesting, almost philosophical debate to be had here, which is who is this show appealing to? And in that sense, does it matter that it's not faithful to Tolkien, right? Because if you ask me, is this faithful to Tolkien's works, hand on heart, no, it is not. The question is, does that matter? And I think the jury's still out on that.
You raised something that I thought was interesting, and that is is this made for, call it the to use nerd slang, the casuals or the hardcore fans? And you've been to the Great Silmarillion event, you've been to the premiere, you've gotten to meet and chat with the showrunners, and what all of the people that have been to those events have reported on is that those guys know their Tolkien, and that almost seems like a problem. Because, to use an example here, is Finrod. They built up Finrod to be this big motivation for Galadriel. She's finishing his mission, which, as a Silmarillion reader, you'll think, well, he got killed by Sauron, but hunting Sauron wasn't the mission. Okay, regardless, we all know they have to tap dance around explicit Silmarillion related material.
Right.
But then only in episode 7 does Galadriel mention for the first time that she has a husband, and you think, wait a second, don't you think a dead husband, even if, or at least a husband you believe to be dead, is a much more powerful motivator than your brother?
Penguin, actually, I had a rebuttal to that particular point.
Well, may I finish my point, please? Sorry. Sure. You almost get the sense that they were so excited that they realized they could use Finrod in the show that they never stopped to think about, should we? So anyway, that's where I was going. Go ahead, Gregory.
I was just mentioning to that specific component of Finrod versus Celeborn. The way, at least that they portrayed it in the show, was that, because of the motivation of Sauron's. Sauron actually kills Finrod, as they portrayed in the show, right? And so Galadriel has a very specific revenge tale there. Whereas it's not said that Sauron is the one who kills Celeborn. So if we were to assume that she believes that Celeborn was killed by Morgoth, then it wouldn't be a specific revenge against Sauron to avenge her husband in the same way that it would be for Finrod.
Yeah, but they could have written it differently. So
I'm just saying that, like, that particular component of the motivation, it depends on who you're talking about as being the murderer of Celeborn.
Well, I just think that a dead husband makes a little bit more. It makes for a better motivator than a dead brother, especially. It almost seems like the better decision would just would be that Galadriel hasn't met Celeborn yet, because all of a sudden, when you realize that her husband's
that's
dead,
what we thought. Yes,
it just feels like, okay, this is the power. This feels like a powerful motivator far more than your brother is. Why mention this now? Anyways.
Yeah.
So if I can just come in on that, I don't think it was about the motivation. I think it was purely as a setup for episode 8 and the interplay between Galadriel and Halbrand, and then the making of the rings. I think what it was really about was the setting up of the dagger. I don't think it was actually about that motivator, because, like you say, it's not coming through. But actually, we make far more references to that dagger, and I think that was really what it was about. It's just an excuse to show that to us. And
Oh, it's mechanical. Yeah, I don't know. Is it just mechanical? I don't think so. She talks about Finrod a lot, so it's obviously very important to her. In terms of how it registers for the audience, it depends. Depends, but yeah.
For me,
you've been
for
quiet.
me, it would make sense that the reason why they would like to go with Finrod is that they do have a conflict. Obviously, the place where Finrod dies and the reason why he dies is basically Sauron. So I guess they probably wanted to go with that being like the prime motivation, because that's the closest relative that Galadriel loses to Sauron specifically, and since Sauron will be the main villain of the show, I guess that's why it makes sense. But I agree, they could have said both Celeborn and Finrod, and then maybe just go with Celeborn still being the prime, the prime reason why. Like they could have gone with both without hiding Celeborn for so long, and just make him the main motivation. Even though later, hopefully in the next season, we will indeed end up seeing him again.
Yeah.
But yeah, the story around Galadriel, especially in the first part of the season, the whole storyline, her path around Middle Earth and like the seas and Numenor, it just felt very forced in order to get from point A to point B to point C, because for whatever reason for the reasons they had, they needed her to go and do all of these things. Like I remember when we had the leak that Galadriel would be going to Numenor at some point, we had so many theories, and the main one was, and we were all willing to bet that would be the case, was that she would be the emissary of Gil-galad going to Numenor for whatever reason she would need to go there, but she would be the emissary. And like if you're the king and there's this huge kingdom of men that you really need good relations with, you will send one of your top tier noblemen or noblewomen. So in this case, Galadriel would definitely be in like top 3 picks at least, if not the top pick. So it made a lot more sense to do it in a way like that. But I guess they really wanted to connect Galadriel with Sauron and make them like the two sides of the same coin, and use that as like the main thread of the story.
Which is not a bad concept.
It's not, but it's questionable how successful they were, depending on which part of the story you're looking at and at which point of the season we are looking at.
The theme they were trying to build to was by being so eager to look at and seek for evil that in the end you end up creating it, and obviously that's what they're going for. It just
are they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Looks like
Galadriel. The entire theme of the season can be summed up with Gil-galad, or was it Elrond, basically saying that you have to be careful that by searching for evil that you don't end up creating it, or whatever the quote.
Gil-galad, yeah.
Those people that watch the show multiple times,
wind that.
Yeah. And lo and behold, that's exactly what Galadriel does. As Halbrand told her, I just wanted to stay in Numenor, but you pushed me here. You brought me to the Southlands. You brought me to this. You made me king. You took me to Eregion. This is all you're doing, honey. And so it just wasn't done too well. If you ask me, but I'm now asking Lakhitia.
Thank you. Yeah, as for me, I'm very middle of the road. The show was not what I hoped it would be. Mostly I'm disappointed in how the lack of interest I have in rewatching it. It's just, it seems very much like a generic show to me. While it does have Tolkien's characters, they don't feel particularly Tolkienian to me in most cases. The Middle Earth, I know Sean has complimented the looks of it. For me, I don't know. It doesn't look too much like Middle Earth to me, and that's probably partially because I'm so used to Peter Jackson's um visions of what Middle Earth looks like. But also, I don't know, I really like lots of the fan art and just art in general of Middle Earth, and for some reason this show just felt way too generic to me. But there were some things that I really did like, and one of the things was very, very unexpected to me, which is when we learned there's going to be Harfoots in this show. Everybody just collectively gave out a groan. uh, Ultimately, that part of the show ended up being one of the most enjoyable for me by far. Especially the characters of Nori and Poppy and the stranger. I thought they were absolutely lovely. They had fantastic chemistry, and they were very well acted as far as I'm concerned. So I was really, really pleasantly surprised by them. Some of my favorite dialogue was given to these characters. It was often very heartwarming. It wasn't always successful, and it was very cheesy at times. But I don't know. For the most part, I was very, 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 very pleasantly surprised by what we've seen. Also, another thing that I really liked was Adar. I thought he was, particularly the performance, I thought was really good. And the way he was written, I really liked. We were given a sympathetic villain, or I'm not
Yes.
even sure if he's supposed to be a villain or maybe more
No,
like an
I think he
anti-hero
is.
or
Yeah.
something. But yeah, in any case, it's. I thought, I know this is also not it's a very controversial opinion because a lot of people will disagree with me on that. But I personally, I really like that. I thought it was really nicely done. But the main thing that I disliked was, like I said, the show itself wasn't very compelling. Say what you will about, for instance, The Witcher. I don't think that's a good show, but it's very fun to watch. This show, I didn't think it was a very good, I don't know, very fun show to watch at all. It was dragging at points. Some of the plot
Oh
lines
yeah.
I was completely disinterested in. The whole Southlands plot line, with all respect to the actors, but it was so. I was simping hard for Ismail going into this, and I thought that, wow, this is gonna be the plot line that's really gonna hold my attention. Ultimately, I just couldn't care less for the character. Either one of them did. The one character I actually wanted to watch more of was Waldrak. He was the one that really
Yes.
I felt was quite compelling, but everyone else, I was just like, whatever.
It's
Um,
yes.
and the thing that I'm mostly disappointed in was the writing. Some of the dialogue I felt was awfully clunky and very, very stereotypical. Some of it I thought was nice, but for me, this was the weakest part of the show, and something that I really, really want to see
I agree.
improve in further seasons. And as far as faithfulness to the lore is concerned, I did not in my wildest dreams imagine they would even be allowed to stray as far from the lore as they have. And I know many people have said this before, but there's very little given written about the Second Age in terms of actual events, dialogue, in-depth characterization. And the little that we have has been ignored in lots of cases, and it has been replaced by completely different stuff. And I'm really puzzled about that. So yeah,
There's a whole lot to unpack there, and you've
Yeah,
clearly been waiting your turn to speak. So, but you said something early on that I want to revisit. You said the show does not feel Tolkienian. So I want to, and I feel like that's a really good just topic to address. And since you said it, you can go first. What is Tolkienian to you, and how did the show fall short? And then I'd love to hear Sean's
Yeah.
thoughts.
I don't know. For me, I felt like not all of the themes were. I see that the hearts of the showrunners were in the right place, and I see where they were trying to go with the storylines,
Mm,
but I felt that a lot of the times they fell short. I thought that characterization did not feel close to what Tolkien's character would feel like. I'm not sure if I use the
Do you
term that
do
the
you have a
show
concrete example of that?
of what, of the characterization not being.
Yeah, the characterization not being
yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
okay. I thought, well, this is going to be a very obvious one, but I don't see the way Galadriel was depicted as a character Tolkien would have used. And I'm not saying that this is not the Galadriel we know by the end of the Third Age, but her being as pissy as she was, like at the court in Numenor, and she was very, very, she's supposed to be a protagonist. She's supposed to be somebody we're rooting for, and she was just like really impatient, like the showrunners have said, full of piss and vinegar. And I'm just not sure that this is somebody that would be considered a hero in the lore as we know it.
Mm.
I don't know.
I have a point just to illustrate it very short. I never would have thought, if you told me ahead, that I would see Galadriel holding Elendil at the point of a knife.
Yeah.
That I think crystallizes
And
that.
just, that was like a lot of these more aggressive moments from her were just a result of something pretty minor in my eyes. She was
Yeah,
just
yeah,
behaving as though she's never heard of diplomacy before, or even restraint, or even respect to other people, which I thought
yes.
was, I don't know.
She was emotionally unintelligent.
Pretty
Yes.
much so. Yeah.
Sean, as the head of the Tolkien Society, I am really excited, eager to hear your views on this.
Mm.
Yeah, so I've got quite a few thoughts. So there are things about that I think that actually captured Tolkien quite well. So actually, one of them, Lakhitia mentioned earlier, was about Adar, right? The story about Adar is really interesting because actually it's almost a meta conversation about Tolkien's own struggles with the irredeemability of orcs, right? And I think that's a really nice touch in there, which is Tolkien himself struggled with what he'd written, right? And whether orcs were redeemable. But the issue with
There's that
me,
idea of, sure, the orcs are evil in a way based on how they behave, but if you separate them from a dark lord and leave them to their own, can they improve? Great idea.
yeah, excellent, and that, and they've picked up that from Tolkien's works, right? And one of the things that the script writers said to me is, yes, they've got the rights to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, but they're inspired by all of it. Now, to go back to the fundamental question about what is Tolkienian, and I think it relates to what people said about the rewatchability of this. You read through Tolkien stories multiple times because you enjoy the journeys and you feel for those characters. You want to go on the journey with them. One of the problems about this show is not only have they compressed time, they've also compressed space as well. There's no sense of journey at all. Characters are able to instantly teleport wherever they want to go, and actually,
Yes.
they've completely minimized that entire sense of Middle Earth from that perspective. I agree. Some of the characters do come across as slightly one-dimensional. Actually, the interesting thing is not the dialogue we've got, but is the lack of dialogue we often have between some of the characters. That actually sometimes they're not really saying very much at all, and the whole issue is the whole storyline was set up almost to be as a this idea of the mystery box, right? It's a puzzle to be unpicked by the viewer. And actually, Tolkien never did this at all. In all of his stories, you know who the bad guy is right off the bat. You know exactly what they need to do. You know exactly what how this story is going to pan out, right? One of the books is called The Return of the King. You know the ending because the pleasure in the story is in the journey. It is not in the I'm trying. It's not a murder mystery here. And that's the bit.
It's not Agatha Christie. Yeah.
Yeah, this has been completely lost in that sense. That's why this doesn't feel that's why there's parts of this that don't feel are Tolkienian at all, because it's about that journey, and as part of that journey, that real sense of hope. Tolkien's stories are about hope fundamentally, hope for a better future. I didn't get a great sense of hope in this series at all.
Despite that, it's not going to be better. The whole theme is it's the slow decay, but in hope, not despair, fighting against that.
Yeah, it's a little bit harder, I guess. You know, Tolkien, I think, is largely a tragedian. Most of his stories are tragedies, but at least The Lord of the Rings is like comic tragedy. Like, you know, the good guys win at terrible cost, but they win. And the same with The Hobbit. But the Second Age, not so much. It's mostly just, it's like Hamlet or something. Everyone dies. The end. So it's, you know, it's different
But
in that way. So I
there's
don't know.
hope. There's always hope.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. At the end, I guess there is a little bit. Yeah.
Mm.
Gregory Strider.
You know, I first of all, I think Lakhitia's nailed so much of the issue that it's almost not even worth retreading some of what she said. I agreed with the vast majority of what she said, although maybe my ratio was slightly different to some of it. If we're talking about the biggest weaknesses, I think when we're talking about the writing, it's not just the dialogue that's weak. It's the conceptualization of circumstances. And you know, okay, here's a specific example. Elves are immortal. Why would they want to take jobs from people in Numenor? And why would Numenorians be concerned about that? Alexa, stop. I just started playing Stairway to Heaven, which has a Tolkien reference.
No stairway denied.
Yeah. But so you know, like that whole like took our job sort of thing. It's like what it made no sense in the context of Tolkien.
Yeah.
We heard that we saw we had that leaked to us last fall, and we didn't believe it because we thought it was so stupid.
It was embarrassing.
We didn't have any confirmation of it, but we just thought, oh God, this is terrible. I hope this is just a paraphrase that got turned around multiple different ways. And then when I actually saw that happen, I thought, I can't believe they actually went down this road.
And I almost like that's to me one of the most egregious examples. Maybe this point would even hit more accurately if I pick one of the less egregious but more common issues that they had with this. But for all those problems, there were certain aspects that I really enjoyed about the show. And I think one of the things I really enjoyed were the moments that did feel Tolkienian to me. And the problem was that there weren't enough. You know, every time it happened, it felt like this, like I had this warm glow come over me. It was this like wonderful moment where I was like, here, this is why we're here. You know, but they were too infrequent. But one of the moments for me was when Ishmael has the moment with the tree when he's in the orc pit before he, you know, and you know that's something that they didn't even do as well Peter Jackson didn't do as well even is convey the importance of nature and trees in particular, actually. And I think this show did a good job, even if they play loose with the lore in certain aspects. But they did a good job of bringing the importance of trees and earth into this world, and sort of, you know, the machinations of the enemy and technology being a force for evil. Whereas, you know, the elves are more in tune with nature. And again, there weren't enough moments like this, but when it did happen, it was meaningful.
Yeah.
Was it? I felt it was a bit superficial. I don't know. I like these little moments. Yeah, I like these little moments, and you know, planting the seeds and everything. I don't know. Maybe exactly because you know the nature is so important in Tolkien in general. I felt that the way they did it was just in a very, you know, ticking off the box kind of way. I did appreciate it nonetheless, but I felt it was done very, very shallowly somehow.
There's one other moment that I thought, not related to nature, that I thought was handled really well, and I think you just a little bit, Lakhitia, was with Adar, and particularly in season 6, the dialogue between him and Galadriel. And I thought that was maybe the ballsiest choice that the showrunners made, was to let Galadriel be the bad guy for a little bit. And I thought that that was a really lovely choice in terms of setting up a character arc, as well as creating, Adar was the really the one created character for the show that had some real depth and a point of view. And I wouldn't argue that he is a villain so much as a
I think he is.
study of a tragedy.
He's definitely a villain, but you clearly understand his motivations. I mean,
Yes.
he's basically going all Hitler on the Southlanders, with the idea of living space for the orcs. But to date, the orcs have basically been the despised slaves and soldiers of the enemy. So his quest is, I want them to be free, but we're just going to kill anyone on our path to, on that path. So, bad, but we're like, okay, well, I like his goal a little bit.
I agree. I'll amend that. He's a villain, but he is not a caricature, and he's one of the most fully rounded characters on the show. And dialogue, I think, that felt Tolkienian in a way. I mean, like grappling with morality and good and evil in a really sort of intellectual and full-throated way, as opposed to sort of this lip service or sort of generic fantasy brands, as Lakhitia was pointing out earlier.
Yes, I agree. Of the new concepts introduced into this season, there have been quite a few of them. Adar is by far the most successful, if not the only one, that is. So yeah.
Can I just refer to something that Sean has said like half an hour ago, perhaps at this point?
By all means, go ahead.
Sean was wondering who the intended audience for this show was, who the show was primarily made for. And I think that's a very valid question. I think their intention was to have a show, everybody could just jump in and understand what it's about. Everybody would be drawn in immediately, but with these little, winks to the hardcore fan base. I think that was the intention, but I don't think it was realized very well. I think trying to placate the fandom with just giving them little snippets of random bits of lore, and then diverging from the lore in very, very profound senses in lots of ways, I don't think this is a successful equation. I think most of the first time watchers, people who don't know the history of the Second Age, I think it was fairly easy for them to understand what this was about. But I think the way they tried to, sort of say, yeah, okay, we know we're making big changes, but see, we did mention Arendil here once, you should be really happy about it. I don't think that was done very successfully.
Yes, that's what all those callbacks kind of feel like. It's like we are supposed to go, this is the best thing ever because somebody mentioned Tar Miniature. And it's like, well, okay. And the other thing too about it is that it comes across so geeky with all these name drops in dialogue and all these stories in dialogue. And like there's almost no conversation that doesn't revolve around, in days of old, blah 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 blah. Like it's no. It's like cumin in a dish. You need to put just a little bit of it, otherwise it takes over the whole thing.
May I make a quick comment on the audience question, if that's all right?
Please do.
I think right now we're sort of framing it as a question about whether or not it's for casual or hardcore Tolkien fans. But I also think a place where it didn't seem to know where its audience was in terms of the age demographic of where it was aiming. One of the things that makes Tolkien so successful, both the books and the Peter Jackson films, is that it's grappling with these like really difficult concepts often in a way that is approachable but truthful and resonant and deep. And as we saw often, like in the Harfoots, I think the word used earlier was cheesy. I think there's an element of this show which didn't treat its audience as adults and gave us these, it had a more storybook, childlike quality, which is this is aimed for 12-year-olds, but really this is something that should be able to be enjoyed by adults. And I don't think it challenged its audience nearly enough.
I think you can really see that in the number of kid characters that are in the show. So Nori comes across as like 16, 17, so does Poppy. What's his face? Theo is 14. There are like kids in this, and Arian comes across like an 18-year-old, suddenly Isildur is. And speaking of kids,
this was perfect. This was absolutely perfect.
I try. So, yeah.
But in terms of treating the audience like grown-ups, I think this is a rule actually. So, for instance, going back, like anybody who hasn't even read the books but has seen the Jackson films, Isildur isn't going to be dead, right? Don't pretend to us that he's dead. You know that and weirdly they didn't resolve. They chose not to resolve that by the end of the series either. Like we didn't even get the scene of like the horse continuing like finding him at the end, right? Which I sort of thought we were going to get. We're all supposed to be left to pretend
it was totally set up, and they dropped that.
Right.
Yeah, very, very, very peculiar. And fundamentally, I agree. And you want to get to a situation where, for me, as chair of the Tolkien Society, that people watch this show and think, I like what I'm seeing, therefore I want to read the books. Now, my understanding from my conversations is that the books aren't selling. They haven't seen a particularly noticeable increase in book sales based on this show. So, if there's a test here, which is this convincing audiences that this is good enough to go out and read Tolkien's books? No, that's not. It's not passing that test either. People are not really coming to Tolkien. Yeah, it's not happening. They're not seeing particularly. And you all can look at you can look at all the Times bestseller lists and you see that the Lord of the Rings or Silmarillion, they're not featuring on there. They were 20 years ago. Now I know some people would say it's because everybody's read them following the films. Actually, we had this in the early 80s when the BBC radio series came out. Loads of people went out and bought those books. 20 years later, everyone was like, oh, everybody knows this story. No, the films came out and everybody went out and bought the books again. And I remember at the time, you'd go on the train, you'd see people reading The Lord of the Rings, right? You'd see it around you.
Yes.
I can't think I've seen anybody reading it, right? People haven't come to the book. Certainly in sort of English language countries. I think there's some differences globally. I know in some of Latin America, but that trend was there already before the show arrived. So that, in a sense, also plays this sense of, our people feel like they're being treated as adults enough that they want to read the books, right? And that's not happening here either. And the other challenge I've got is going back to the question earlier about whether this is Tolkienian. I think part of the problem is it's more Jacksonian than it is Tolkienian, right? Yeah. Actually, there's too many of these casual references back. That's one of the reasons why I really struggle with the Harfoots, because I like Harfoots being there, but we ended up basically it becoming Frodo and Sam and Gandalf, right? That's how it ended up at the end of the series, right? Did we?
I think
really
Nori is more Bilbo-like, but yeah.
Well, to go into the Jacksonian, think of you think Isildur dying. I just saw that and I thought, oh, it looks like a flashback to Aragorn dying in the Two Towers. And
and the horse.
He's also likewise discovered by a horse, right?
Yes. The Legends of the Foreshot. But in this show at least. But yeah, that's another funny thing too. This show is walking quite a few kind of corporate tightropes, I call them. One of them is that it's making a show of the Second Age out of, I counted something like 30 pages of text. The other thing is that it's as if Todd Phillips' Joker spent 90 minutes trying to fool you into thinking that it was a prequel to The Dark Knight. That's what this show is doing, because it's really not a prequel to the movies at all. And that jig is given up at the end of the season when we see the rings. They don't look the same. and
But the
I don't
Balrog
know
looks the
that.
same. So
I mean, vaguely, like it's not the same Balrog. It's just similar design, but you can feel the dancing around the Silmarillion, but also the dancing around of we can't use that design, but we want something like it's so weird, that aspect of the show, so peculiar. I've never seen anything quite like that.
So I think there's a couple of bits there. So first of all, instantly I agree about the rings. The 3 rings look like engagement rings to me. They don't look like magical rings of power. Like they definitely don't look anything like that. But aside from that, I think there's a couple of challenges here. So first of all, there's clearly stuff we've already seen where there is more flexibility around what rights they have to use than is the formal case, right? We already have evidence that they've got that they are able to access more than just the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. So they've made a couple of references, things like the Numenor map. That's clearly from outside the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. So I think too often the conversation we're having about the show is one that's raised, and I think probably not bother. Bearing in mind when you've got Simon Tolkien working as a consultant on the show, the chances are there's more flexibility there than I think everybody would appreciate.
Yeah, but
so there's that. I think the other challenge is that they chose quite deliberately. They filmed the first series in New Zealand. They went to Weta Workshop to make all their stuff. They got Daniel Falconer to do Tengwar. They got John Howe to do design. Of course, you're going to end up if you choose to go to all the same people that did the films, you're going to end up with something that looks similar. And so the problem is they're in like this uncanny valley, right? It's because all of these people are doing something that they are familiar with themselves, but also they know we can't be like exactly the same as Lord of the Rings films because that might breach their copyright, the New Line Cinema I've got. So you end up in this weird uncanny valley all the time, which is we got all the people that want to produce something that's similar, right? Weta Work. And that's not criticism of them. John Howe's got a particular style, right? He's going to do his style. He's already done that style. The reason why Peter Jackson picked Alan Lee and John Howe was because their artwork that they produced for the books and for calendars, etc., was part of the visual canon that readers were familiar with, right?
Yes.
And so Jackson picked that up.
I have a book of Tolkien artwork from I think 1997 that is 90% Howe and Lee. So yeah, when I watched the movies, I thought, oh, I have a picture of that. I have a picture of that.
Yeah, almost shot compositions, sometimes 1-to-1. Yeah,
exactly. So it's unsurprising that you go to the same artist, you're going to get the same visual styles coming out. But because they can't be exactly the same, we have this weird uncanny valley. Yeah, it goes back to this sense of, do they, in terms of their audience, do they want it to be people who enjoyed the films or not? Do they want that audience? Because I can't work out if they do want that audience or don't want that audience. Because at times it feels like
it's weird.
They do. Like, when in doubt, insert name here, always follow your nose, and you're like, okay, you do want that audience. And then, other times, it's like, you don't.
I feel like we're dancing around something and I've told Hendes, and I've at least told this to maybe a couple of other people here, but I know at least Hen, is that let's look at the narratives of what we have so far. You've got Eregion, Numenor, Moria, Southlands, and the characters in those. Not all of them, but there's plenty of intersection of them moving from one area to another, interacting with different people. Now, we haven't seen Galadriel meet the dwarves yet, but that's probably going to happen. But what we have, and then over here we have the Harfoots, and we've got sort of Frodo, sort of Sam, and is it Gandalf? Maybe. But how is that going to tie back into everything else? We don't know, because right now they've announced their intention to travel further to the east. And of all the subplots in the show, I felt like the Harfoots were the only ones that had the space to breathe. Whenever any other subplot was developing momentum, things were getting interesting, they pivoted to the Harfoots. I almost gained the sense that that the showrunners have the narrative that they wanted to tell, which is about the forging of the rings, Numenor, Southlanders, and then there's the narrative that they were instructed to include, which they didn't know how to, and that involves hobbits and Gandalf.
I don't think
Because
that's
it's almost like there's
yeah.
two different shows going on at the same time. At
Yes,
least
I
as-
think there are, but I don't think it's very easy and very tempting to frame these things on corporate collusion of
Oh,
executives.
I'm just saying.
saying,
I'm just saying
I don't
that
think
I
it
don't
is.
think they saw a way to work the hobbits in here.
Yes,
And
it's
so
not
that's why
worked
they're
very organically.
there, but they're separate.
Yes, but they do show them a lot of love in the sense that, as you said, they get a lot of time in the edit. So I don't think they're half-assing the hobbits. I just think they didn't find a way to work them into the main plot as of yet in a very, in a
Organic.
believable way.
Yeah.
Organic. Yeah. But I do think they wanted them there. It wasn't a case, I think, of external collusion.
No, I'd just love to hear Sean's thoughts on this, knowing how many conversations you've had with the estate, and I know you met the showrunners. Just your thought here.
Yeah. So first of all, I think the point you raised about the Harfoots is a really interesting point more broadly about the show, which also follows one of my disappointments about the dwarves, which is we were told by the showrunners that they wanted to depict dwarven culture. They felt like dwarves had never been done justice to them, and actually they became a subplot of Elrond. Right? We did, apart from a couple of nice episodes, nice scenes at the beginning. We didn't really get them. And also, what was the point of showing us the Balrog? Completely pointless and weird. Just dropping that in there randomly didn't make any sense at all. In terms of their direction, so my understanding is they had different pitches from Amazon, HBO, Netflix. The estate chose Amazon as the ones to go with. I would presume that one of the motivations behind that was that Amazon is the world's biggest bookseller and they would hope to sell some books as well. So I imagine there's going to be some collective disappointments about, certainly in sort of English language territories and in fact in Western Europe as well, that the books are not seeing that increase in sales. What is more challenging to depict is that relationship ongoing after the pitch between the estate and the family and Amazon. It seems to be the case that Amazon do have fairly free reign on this, actually. And I casually wonder if perhaps the ongoing involvement of the family has kind of been bigged up by Amazon because that's the narrative that suits them. Certainly, I struggle with that sense that the corporate executives are told JD and Patrick what to do. I mean, my sense from them is, I think we've already heard this here, is that they've kind of got excited. They are genuine, Patrick in particular, big Tolkien fans, right? Genuinely, they love it. They were able to quote freely from Tolkien's letters, from Tolkien's works, like they knew it, right? There was no doubt in my mind, and you mentioned it at the beginning, that these people knew and understood Tolkien. And I do think that is that challenge, right? Because they've got so excited by this. Like, actually, this series probably would have been a lot better had we not had the Harfoots in it, because they were just not relevant to the rest of what was going on. We could have introduced those in a second series. This series probably would have been a lot better had we not had actually some of the faffing around in Numenor. Did we really need to do that? I don't think we really did, actually. Didn't really add a lot to the story. The only thing that I think it's really added is presumably Miriel's blindness, but we could have done that some other way, and the separation of Elendil and Isildur for whatever reason that is, but we've not got to that yet.
Okay.
Yeah,
that seems to be the only motivation. I'm not getting a sense here that either Amazon executives or the estate are laying down hard and fast rules. And in fact, I think Fellowship of the Fans about a year ago said that Tom Shippey had said these are the rules. And I think at the time I said this is rubbish, and I think they've pretty much all been broken in the show, haven't they? I think
the interview he did with the German Society, right? The German Tolkien Society.
Yeah, that turned out not to be very.
I had a post on Reddit where someone was talking about this, and this was in the spring, and I just kind of went back to it and say, well, and here's a link to the interview. Here are all the main things that he took from this, and this is how to date we've learned all of these are factually incorrect. Let's stop referring to that interview, please.
Yeah, I'm assuming that was really early in development where things were still very much.
So I mean, I called out the interview pretty much the second it was released as being inaccurate. I think the less that's said about that interview, the better. It's just been completely been shot, and that's a lot of the myths we got around the show stem from that interview, actually, and
Yes.
a lot of the reporting that's followed on that interview. And I think we all need to get it out of our heads. It was basically wrong, right? A guy that wasn't no longer working on the show was saying probably his own views as opposed to what were the views or what was actually going on here. Because I think one of the things he said was there were going to be 20 episodes this season. That was never, ever, ever the case. And
Yes.
I knew that
He was
back in
confusing.
2018.
He was putting 2 seasons together.
Yeah, it was just never accurate. But yeah, I think that Amazon have got a pretty free reign here to kind of to do what they want to do with the adaptations. I know there is that. I know that the family and the estate and Amazon will have conversations about how far they want to push it in terms of using information or IP that's not in the Hobbit and Lord. I know those conversations have happened and they're ongoing. So that's going to be something that I think we'll continue to see play out, where there may be Silmarillion-y things that pop into the stories because they know because as an example, right, the name Anatar does not appear in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Now, presumably, we are going to get. I don't quite know how they're going to do it with Halbrand, but presumably he's going to come back as Anatar at some point when they get to the making of the Rings of the Men and Dwarves, right? Now, if you were Amazon, you go to the Tolkien estate and you say, I want to use the name Anatar. And if they said, well, you don't have the rights to that's in the Hobbit and the Rings, Amazon could turn around and say, okay, then we'll call him Dave. Right. And of course, right, yeah. This isn't going to happen, is it? So there's going to be some flexibility around the edges of this. And I think, to be fair, from my understanding of where the Tolkien the estate is, they want this to be successful because they see this as part of they obviously they want it to be financially successful, but also it's about an element of recognizing Tolkien's heritage and him being successful in the 21st century. Now, whether the show lives up to that is a separate question, but I think they're along for the ride on this one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Strider, I haven't heard from you in a moment.
Yeah, I finished binging the season today just before the stream started, so I was actually enjoying myself and listening to you people talk, so I can collect my thoughts. Well, I'm not an expert on this particular bit that we're talking about now, so I'll just go back to the show itself. I think that they really tried to do a lot of things in this first season, and one of the main complaints I had throughout our Sunday breakdowns of each episode was that they seem to have taken more that they can chew. Maybe not when it comes to their skills, but definitely when it comes to the restraints that they had, which is, for me, the 8 episodes per 5 seasons plan. I think that's one of the problems. And I think that, for example, if you look at the first 2 episodes, I think they were quite solid. It was a promising beginning. Then it kind of falls through as you go through the season. Like the midpoint of the season was quite all over the place in terms of quality, quantity. It was very strange. And then towards the end, if we disregard the actual story and everything that we may have expected and everything that Tolkien wrote and all those things, if we look at what the story that they were telling, I think they kind of managed to patch things up, but it still felt definitely very flat in many ways. And I think you said earlier that the Harfoots were the only, or you or Sean, the Harfoots were basically the only storyline that had the room to breathe, to feel, to feel the characters, to feel what they're doing, to see that everyday life. This also connects to what Sean said, I don't know, 40 minutes ago or something, when we were discussing that part. The world felt very small, in so many ways. Like you have this grand shot of, Casa Doom's main area, and then they go to like a tiny room, and then you have
Region is
Numenor,
like that.
this absolutely amazing shot of the whole city from several views, like from this side of the statue, from this side of the statue, from looking down at the statue from the bottom. And then you go to like this tiny room here, and then you go to the tiny room over there, and it just felt constantly like that. And then all the fast traveling. We have 6 movies that show you the size of Middle Earth and how rich is it and how complicated is it to get from point A to point B. And they tried to do so many things to go back to what I started talking about. They tried to do so many things to set up so many stories. Like as Sean said, like we could have introduced Harfoots in the second season, perhaps. They started all of this and finished very few things, and to a very debatable degree of success.
It's season 1 of 5 seasons. They shouldn't expect to finish so many things. But to compare a little bit of apples to oranges, even though the movies were, of course, 3 movies telling the same story, in the Fellowship there is an emotional closure to it that I don't think Rings of Power had. But to jump back to something you said about having those big dramatic wide shots, and then they'd spend the rest of their time in a Region or Numenor or what have you in a locked inside a room. One of the things that the Jackson films did very well was they would position their cast on balconies. So think about Rivendell. So many times
Frodo and Rivendell
looking over the Valley of Rivendell, or in Gondor, they'd be standing on the wall when Gandalf is given his speech about death, which of course is pulled from the end of Return of the King books. Or they're standing on a balcony and they see the beacon lit in Minas Morgul and all the stuff. So you have a mix of the wide shots showing the entire city or realm. You have the close-up shots inside a particular room, but then you'd also have medium shots in between them where you can still see the set, but you can see the wider world. This was all indoors or a big massive shot, CGI fest outdoors.
Can we just before you continue, we've got a super chat, and I think we absolutely should read it. So thanks so much, Corey, first of all, for the super chat. Corey says, would it partly redeem anyone's perception of Galadriel if it was that Sauron was close to her disguised on her quest, projecting anger and sorrow into her mind along with her dead brother's memory?
I think that's.
I feel we had already met her when we first met her. She was already mad and angry long before she ever encountered Halbrand. So I don't think that would really redeem that.
I think it's very tempting to think this way, but I think it's kind of dangerous to sort of write in between the lines stuff that isn't necessarily like you can do it, but it can be like, it reminds me of when people heard the Mithril thing and they were like, oh, apocryphal, that means that it doesn't have to be true, and they would come up with these very elaborate theories about how it wouldn't be true. Well, Occam's razor proved right, it was true. And it's the same, kind of thing, It's just people, when you do these kinds of theories, you kind of work yourself up into a false sense of hope sometimes, and then the disappointment later on is that much greater. So I wouldn't advise people to do that to themselves. That's really what I...
Yeah, we had a lot of theories throughout the season, and like even with the leaks and just before we went into the season itself and during the season, we had so many theories like, oh, maybe this means that this thing is going to happen, and then next episode, no, it's actually this thing that's going to happen, and then 3 episodes later, it was actually the obvious thing that was on the screen. So yeah, I think we all suffered from that, but that was also like probably the most fun part of this whole journey in the last year or so of all the theory crafting.
If you do it for fun, that's different. Yeah.
But you're right. Trying to find like an like a super convoluted way to make an excuse for something or to find the reasoning behind something, it can be a very painful path towards disappointment. And I think we had definitely quite a few of those so far.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just so many things going on here. I feel like there were two. I don't know if this is an issue with the editing. Well, I think there was a degree of issue with the editing. We have characters like Emma Harva, who was billed as one of the big cast members. There's maybe 2 or 3 scenes I can think of her.
Whereas Waldreg, as Lakhitia said.
Whereas Waldreg didn't even get a poster, and yet he's far more impactful on this show than she has been to date.
And present as well.
Yeah.
You see a lot more of him than...
Yeah, totally.
I just wonder how much of this was cut off on the editing board, because even in the first 2 episodes, I felt like it somehow was a mix of a breakneck pace, heat in some places, and plotting elsewhere. There's just... I feel like somehow there's the ideal show that they wanted to make, and then there's what we received.
It is interesting that Amazon has this kind of like quota that their seasons are 8 episode long, an hour an episode.
Yeah.
And they stick to it pretty closely. If you remove credits and stuff, all the episodes are around an hour. If you give or take like a few minutes, but they're all an hour. So yeah, that's maybe part of it. Weird.
To me, this feels so. During the season, I would compare it with the Kingdom of Heaven, with its theatrical cut and its director's cut, which is supreme in every way possible. But now, I actually after seeing it again today and a bit yesterday, it feels like that. So the theatrical cut, which needs the extended cut because the story was so much so bigger than what we saw, that once you get the director's cut, it actually feels better because you can see all the tiny things that they were trying to do. But now I would actually add to that also it feels like the Hobbit movies, which took one shorter story and extend and prolonged it in so many ways that you actually can cut down from there and get the proper story. So I think there's a weird mix of, depending on which storyline we're talking about, where we get too little of this, too much of that, but also maybe too few of this in this storyline, and it's all over the place. So I think a lot of issues would have been avoided if we removed the Harfoots from the season, introduced them in the second season, and give these tiny threads. There was one example where Earian is running around, running to try to talk to Pharazôn. She's like, Pharazôn. And we never saw the two of them interact, and she is addressing him with his first, just with his name, without Chancellor Pharazôn. And why would she do that?
Missing.
However, we know that there was a dinner scene where they were supposed to meet and talk. It's supposed to be a very big, important scene for Kemen, for Earian, and for Pharazôn. And it was cut out. And we don't see that. And then you see this random episode, and she's so disturbed that Kemen didn't do something. And why didn't you talk to Pharazôn and so on? And they could have cut it all together because, sadly, because I think we would have wanted to see more of those characters, just to see, do we like them or not, or what's their purpose of the story. But since you already took away the meat of their story, why even leave that scene? It makes zero sense. I just felt it again today. It was unnecessary.
I kind of agree. There was another thing that felt weird was just that Numenorians, the sabotage of the ship. That was in there, but it had no impact on anything else that happened in the rest, and there seemed to be no fallout from it. But
let's see Kemen afterwards.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank Corey again for the super chat, and I guess in response to our thoughts on what we thought of his scenario about Sauron potentially influencing Galadriel from afar, he says that it's not true that someone is shipwrecked on the open ocean and pulls up the one person that is hunting them. He must have been aware of her. And see, I think that's just trying to justify coincidences. It's to go all the way back to something we said about, does it feel Tolkienian? well, here we have a chance meeting of Galadriel and the person she's looking for, the great evil of Middle Earth. And the problem, and I saw someone defending that as, oh, it's a chance meeting. There's lots of those in Tolkien. And Sean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or anyone else can. But typically, when I think of chance meetings in Middle Earth, it's always the Valar or Uru arranging things so the right people are meeting at the right time to combat a great evil. It's never a chance meeting that's going to lead to something terrible happening. It's always going to be something, little coincidence. Is it fate? It's so small that you can almost overlook it, but it has great ramifications that usually end up well. Thorin meeting Gandalf and Bree all those years ago, for example.
Yeah, the conventional wisdom in a show is actually not. The conventional wisdom in drama is that coincidence, that's a Vince Gilligan quote actually, coincidence is fine if it screws the characters over. But in this case, yeah, it's maybe taking that rule and stretching it to its very,
Gregory, what did you think of the Galadriel and Sauron meeting and that early storyline?
Well, I think that notion of Eru pulling strings here and there is actually something. It's one of the things I really, in my most recent read through of the books, I felt like I noted more examples of that than I'd ever really paid attention to before. And it comes to me that one of in the Ainulindale, Eru says to Melkor that nothing he does, like every his discord, right, is ultimately all it does is improve the music. There's nothing he can do that doesn't ultimately have its source in Eru to begin with. And
yes.
I think that this chance meeting, as it was, because I do believe it was coincidence, I don't think Sauron engineered it, I think ultimately has its source in Eru, and is ultimately part of the unfolding of the journey of Arda. And I think at least in that manner it fits, at least in that regard particularly.
I think so. In one of the interviews that were dropped right after the finale aired, Charlie Wickers talked. Of course, it's always, is it just a promise or will it actually be like that? We'll have to wait and see. But he talks about how a lot of the things, like a lot of the questions regarding him and Galadriel, and like that early part of the season regarding their storyline, should be answered in the next season. Though that's a problem on its own, because the next season has to do already again so many other things. So by going back to answer all the questions from the first season and make that make sense, it's again, I think like the time constraints may end up being the main problem of the show, because there's just so much story to tell. There's so much that they cut down. Like even just if we look at Numenor and what it was supposed to be, we have to see. Apparently, we'll see some version of it, given Miriel's vow at the end of the season. But there's so much with Numenor to do. Like there was supposed to be all that colonization and all problems and the bills and everything that comes with that. Like we need to see the Numenorians as the good guys, at least for a bit, and then for them to turn and to fall from grace in the next 2 seasons, maybe. So yeah, I think the main problem is that they just took so much, tried to do so much, and they will not, at least as it seems now, they will not be.
They tried to have their cake
successful enough in doing that, all that, pulling it out.
Will you guys pardon me? I actually have a heart out and have to leave in a minute or two. So just in keeping with what you were saying, I'd love to just give my sort of final thoughts before I sign off. I think ultimately I'm still looking forward to season 2. I still enjoyed this. It didn't hit at the level that I wanted, but once I accepted that, it ultimately became something I enjoyed nonetheless. I enjoyed chatting with you guys every week. I enjoyed the speculation around the show. and I think that there's enough fun in there. Getting to go back to Middle Earth, even when it's not perfect, is something that I just enjoy doing regardless. And I really hope that some of the irons in the fire that they've put in pay off, and that they recognize some of the areas in which they fell short. Maybe this first season from these new showrunners taught them what they needed to learn about putting together a show and places where they fell flat. Despite what that interview said a week ago, I think they are aware of some of the issues fans had with the show, and where there's a difference between the trolls and the fair criticisms. And obviously we won't know till season 2 comes out whether or not they have learned, but nonetheless, the rest of the arc of the show seems to be laid out more clearly. This was the season where it's like, how are they going to work their way in? But some of the major events that have to unfold, they really can't change that much, I don't think. So my hope is that we will see progression going forward, moving into season 2. And that is my particular take. Guys, it's been so much fun doing this with you. I may stick around for a minute longer to hear your guys' thoughts, but I will see you guys again soon.
Thank you, man. See you around.
Yeah,
See you, good sir.
Great. Thank you.
See you later. I see we've had a super chat in again from Corey. Thank you, Corey. Where he said, but Sauron has his full power. Shipwrecked wretch? I think not. Were there even other people? Was there a worm? Or did he plant memories in her mind? I do think this is a good question, and I think it does go back to that question about fate or not. And actually, I'm not convinced we have got Sauron at his full power here. I got the sense that he's not there yet. I think his abilities to be able to project on other people, I think, are limited at this point. He doesn't have the Plantir. He doesn't have, at this point, he doesn't have the ring. So those powers that he would have had over people he didn't have. Notice his ability to influence Galadriel was only when they were physically together in a region. Was he only then, we were told, able to implant those visions in her mind? At other points, we've not had that awareness. But I do think there's a different point here, and this is part of the problem, right? Which is we got this worm that was introduced that suddenly just disappeared. You've got these two characters, and by the way, we never really got to the bottom of who those people that he was with, or quite why he was with them, or how they ended up in that situation. That was never really resolved. And then we heard in the previous conversation, which is maybe it was you doing that. I think that's kind of letting the showrunners off the hook. Actually, what they've created a setup just to get these two characters together for whatever reason.
It just felt like a contrivance.
Yeah, and we're basically I think we're just trying to find a reason why they've done that, right? And actually, they've done it because they like to do it. They wanted to try to get the two of them together, and in Numenor. It wouldn't have been how I did it, but then I'm not the showrunners, and there clearly was an interesting callback in episode 8 about with that reference back again to that moment, which may have been part of the motivation for doing it. But I didn't get the sense that the worm was being directed by Halbrand, because if he was, then you'd surely if you were him, you'd like hang out with the worm, right? You would go off and do things with the worm. You go off and do other things with it.
Right.
I think what they
wouldn't you?
PG. This is the PG-13 podcast.
I think they really wanted to. The question is, what came first, the chicken or the egg? But the story that Fëanor tells her about the ship going into the depths of the sea, the darkness, and then the light, and so on. They were really going for that metaphor. So I think that's why they had them meet like that. And what we talked about like 10 minutes earlier, to give my take on Corey's question. For me, so what we talked about earlier, it's probably the simplest solution. Sadly,
it all comes later.
usually most of our theories that were trying to like overanalyze things came up short, and it was usually what it was as we saw it on the screen. There weren't that many, underlying things happening there. So I think this is also the case with this scene. I think they did end up there. I think there was a ship, there were survivors, there was this creature. I don't think Sauron controlled it. Maybe one of Valar, one of the like Ulmo or one of his Maiars, perhaps. But I don't think it was Sauron creating all this crazy illusion around her. Especially like if we can look at it like that. There's a shot of Galadriel swimming away from the ship when I saw it today. So the camera is looking at her face as she's swimming away from the shipwreck, and people are you can see the people being attacked by the monsters. So it wasn't just in front of her eyes, it was also behind her. So I guess we can take that as maybe some sort of visual confirmation that she wasn't imagining it. But
yeah.
Well, I think ultimately the issue with a number of things in the show comes down to the showrunners wanted things to happen, and either they just, instead of allowing it to be naturally driven by the characters, they just made things happen, or the context showing the deliberation, the build up to it was just removed in the edit.
Mhm.
And at this
I
point,
think that's okay. Yes.
could be.
Yeah.
Well, I think we need to wrap up shortly. Would everyone like to just kind of share their final rating for the show, for the season 1 as a whole? Let's just start. Let's start with go clockwise, starting with Lakhitia.
I think I'm still sitting somewhere 7 out of 10. I was tempted to give it a 6.5 out of 10, but I think overall, yeah, I'm pretty happy with a 7 out of 10. I do really, really, really hope future seasons will be a higher rating for me. I do see a lot of love, efforts put into this show, but
Yes.
for me, it just felt short in quite a lot of ways. So I would say that quality-wise, it's somewhere similar to The Wheel of Time or The Witcher, and I really hoped it would be better for me. So yeah.
I agree.
Hen.
I'm a 6 out of 10. I've already rated it, so
Okay. Strider.
Yes. So for me, I think this show had a lot of great things about it. Obviously, we know the looks and the music were usually for a lot of people either pretty good or great. So that was definitely very well done. Depending on the storyline, it's definitely a mixed bag. A lot of characters felt flat. However, some of them were absolutely fantastic, as you guys mentioned. Adar and the orcs. I think he may be my favorite part of the whole season. He was absolutely fantastic for me. He became one of my favorite Middle Earth characters, and he's an original character as of now, at least. We'll see in the second season. But so yeah, there were definitely a lot of good things about this show, but there was so many disappointments, so many things that just fell short, felt too complicated, didn't land, didn't live up to the setup of which we had a lot. A lot of characters were disappointing. Gil-galad was one of, I think, for so many people, was one of the main disappointments.
Gil-galad is not a character in any sense, so they give it a pass for me.
Okay, fair enough. So yeah, like a lot of really good stuff, but a lot of bad stuff. So when you put those two together, it ends up somewhere in the middle, which is definitely sad. Like we all wanted this to be a really great show, and I would say it is. So I'll rate it 2 times. As a fantasy show, I would say if you take out Game of Thrones from the equation and House of the Dragon, because they're, especially early Game of Thrones, they're peak fantasy that we have seen on a TV, but they're like a different type of fantasy. So if you remove them, this may be the best fantasy show we ever had, but the bar for that is very very low if we remove Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon from the equation. So on that scale, I would say like an 8, maybe even 9 when it comes to fantasy shows. But if you just make like an overall scale of quality that I had, if we put everything like the good and the bad together, it's around the 6.
Okay.
Like really good stuff, really not good stuff. I had fun with it, but I had to kind of work in my brain consciously to have fun with the show. So it's more on the positive side, but it's like a 6.5 maybe, if like on a good day. Yeah, but around the 6.
Mr. Gunner.
So I pretty much agree with what Strider said. You know, I think there are parts of it that are fantastic. I really enjoyed, you know, the opening sequence in episode 1, seeing those 2 trees. We've not really spoken about Disa and Durin. I love that relationship. I love their relationship with Elrond. I thought that was fantastically well
is
done.
fantastic.
Oh wait, I should have implemented a rule that says for everything we say we dislike, we should have been even and mentioned something we like, because I can't believe
we tried.
People come up now. They were great.
I thought they were really great. I think Arondir was great as well. I think Khazad-dûm looked the part. I think Lindon looked the part. I quite like seeing the Southlands. I quite like looking at Numenor. Actually, wasn't the parts of it I wasn't. I thought again it was trying to be a bit too obviously pre-Minas Tirith, but I still liked it. You know, it was nice. So all of that was going for it. As I say, the score was a good score, although I think it was a little bit kind of generic-y fantasy at times, but it was still a good score.
A little bit.
But the pacing let it down. Actually, it was quite frustrating. You know, remember when we were going through episodes 3, 4, 5, that was actually quite a frustrating time, right? It felt like we didn't know what was going on. Nothing was really happening. There was just a lot of pointless conversations going around that weren't really going anywhere. In terms of like fidelity to Tolkien's works, it doesn't do well at all. I agree. It sits somewhere around the 6, 7 mark. You know, if I was a teacher, I'd give it maybe B-, C+ kind of area. That seems to be roughly where it sits. I think. You know, there is promise here, right? So one of the things we can say is yes, although the pacing was weird, they've kind of chucked a lot of things in there. That means they have got a lot of opportunities for payoffs coming down the line. Right, so they have got that to come, and if they play their hand right, where they're going to learn from this episode, they're going to learn some of these things. Actually, the future series episodes are going to series, sorry, it's going to be banger after banger after banger. Like they're really going to do well with it. So yeah, 6, 7 is where I'm at as well.
All right. Well, I'll close off. I said about a year ago that we should prepare ourselves that this is most likely going to be a kind of generic fantasy with Tolkien window dressing on it. And so far, I haven't been surprised at that. Where I have been surprised is that I thought it would be a better show for all the reasons that everyone has listed. So I am right there with you guys, 6.5 or so. Sure, it's season 1, and they seem to be on interviews released during the season, they kind of said that, oh, well, this is all going to be build up. This is all going to pay off later. But it still just says, well, why would you spend this much time, this much money just building up and saying, wait till next season? You've got to get people interested in now. And I wanted to like this more than I found myself liking it, all in all. But anyway, thanks everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Sean, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Lakhitia, Strider.
Can I just before we wrap up, I saw that Mike from Watch Party was in the chat earlier, and I just want to say it out loud again. Corey Castle, by the way, thank you so much for all the super chats today, and please contact us. You were the winner of a raffle a couple of weeks ago for artwork, so please contact either us or Mike at Watch Party LOTR to get your award. There we go. And thanks for hosting, Penguin. Great work. Thanks for hosting the stream, Han. Marvelous job, gentlemen.
And thank you for no longer choosing to zoom in on us individually. Greatly appreciate that.
Well, what were you saying?
All right. Thank you, everyone.
What were you saying? Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
See ya.
Cheers, everyone. See
Bye.
you.